Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Astro Consciousness channel. I'm Millie, and I am here to give you your forecast for the new moon in Leo taking place on August 4th, 2024. In this channel, I talk about the astrological climate of the week ahead and how you can integrate that into your personal and spiritual growth. But before I begin, I want to thank all of you so much for sharing your experiences, your sun, moon, rising, in the comments, for your likes, for your follows. I love interacting with all of you. If I haven't gotten back to your comment, I will. It is my intention to really begin a more connected dialogue with you guys because, I record these things days ahead, a week ahead sometimes, and I would love for there to be a greater connection. So thank you all so much for that interaction. Another thing, don't forget to sign up for the Eclipse Guide waitlist. I am going to be releasing a September-October eclipse guide that is going to really guide you through the intensity of the eclipse season that's coming in September and October. It's going to be $25. It's going to include 3 guided meditations, a workbook, and a mini lesson to let you know the overview of the astrology that we'll be experiencing at the time, which will tell you a little bit more than what I discuss here on these weekly forecasts. So other than that, let's get started. As always, let's begin with a recap of where we're coming from and where we are headed. So we're coming from a week that for a lot of people has been a week about processing the full moon in Capricorn that took place on July 21st. So that full moon in Capricorn really brought a lot of significant manifestations for a lot of people and made clear what your priorities need to be from this point forward. And that's a very simplistic way of saying it because rearranging our priorities in accordance to what we value within sounds pretty simple and should be pretty simple, but the internal process that we have to move through in order to honor that from a place of integrity, it takes time. And I think that August, September, October are going to be months for us to truly integrate that. Not just integrate the energy of the full moon in Capricorn, because a lot of other things are going to happen within those months, but integrating that which we saw with the full moon in Capricorn. And if you recall from that forecast, I invited you to really give the energy of that full moon in Capricorn the rest of July and perhaps even that first week of August or the first couple of days of August for you to really understand what that full moon in Capricorn was about for you. Without a doubt, that full moon brought a lot of significant endings. It brought sharp turning points in relationships and our relationship to what we want to give our time, energy, and attention to. That, again, all of that seems very simple. And of course, I think there is this I don't know, there's this message or language in the ether of course, I only, want to give to things that give me back. I only want to give to things that fill my cup. But with the South Node transiting the sign of Libra, the thing that's activated are our codependent tendencies. Now, I say this not anywhere near from a place of judgment, but so that we understand just how much those ways of relating have been, they've just been seeped into the way of being, of expecting certain things in relationships. And I think that if there's anything sobering about that full moon in Capricorn is the ability to accept where someone is, even if it's not where we would like them to be, and the responsibility that is placed on us if we choose to remain in a relationship like that, right? Because it's different. It's different. That's very different than being in a codependent relationship. A codependent relationship will say, I'm going to behave a certain way because maybe that's how they'll change, or I'm going to behave a certain way so that they love me. a much more grounded and honest place to being in a relationship is, okay, if I'm choosing to be in a relationship with this person, and I can accept that for what it is without making it mean anything about me, that's a very different way. And and when we think of bringing this energy of the scales to a relationship, it can feel so impersonal and so transactional. But the fact of the matter is that when in relationship, we have to be willing to, again, accept and be honest about what someone is showing us, and accept and be honest about what we truly desire, and not overgive or undergive in this hope that things are different, because then that very quickly turns into manipulation, right? So it's an interesting energy that we're moving towards here, and that leads us to the new moon in Leo, in which I think that Venus actually plays a really significant role in. And I'll get into that in a second. This new moon in Leo is at 12 degrees Leo. And so anytime that we have a new moon in Leo, it is the invitation for our inner world, the moon, and our external expression, the sun, to come together and set an intention to plant something, to create something, especially in Leo, to see something through over the next 6 months. So this new moon in Leo opens up a 6-month energetic window that comes to an end with the full moon in Leo of February 2025. Now, if there is anything that the sign of Leo teaches the rest of us, teaches the rest of the signs, is that we get to give ourselves permission to walk away from any situation, any place, any relationship in which our light is not appreciated. Remember, Leo is the energy that has to do with dignity, that has to do with pride, and that can go one of two ways, right? But if we're talking about the highest expression of pride, it is the understanding, for instance, of, you know what, I've worked really hard on myself to have a greater understanding of myself, to have a different standard of living. And I take pride in that because that took a lot of work. And if anything outside of me is not reflecting back that light that I've worked so hard to cultivate within myself, then that brings about different questions about how I want to be in this space. I love the sign of Leo. I think it is the sign in the zodiac that really, again, gives us the permission to say, I am worthy, and this is why, and this is how. And if you don't appreciate it, then I'm going to go somewhere where I am. It's a very direct energy that, to me, just feels so beautiful, so vibrant. And there's something actually quite loving about that, because Leo is the sign of love. It is the sign of the heart. And Leo is known as a creative energy because in its expression, in its creativity, it's putting light out into the world, and that is a form of showing love. So when that's not reflected back, that's when a not so well integrated Leo energy can get very arrogant, right? Very competitive. But a well integrated Leo simply accepts their own worth and finds a space where it can shine and be appreciated fully. Because that's the thing with Leo energy. Traditionally speaking, it is the sign that craves the applause, that wants to be recognized for who that energy is, for what it is, for what it does. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that, right? It can rub certain people the wrong way, but think about, think about how you would move about the world if you allowed yourself to accept that, to accept that the applause doesn't have to mean an actual applause, or doesn't have to mean that people are simply catering to your every need, desire, and want, but simply that you are appreciated. So this new moon in Leo, one of the first aspects that I noticed is that it creates a sextile to the Mars-Jupiter conjunction. A Jupiter-Mars conjunction is so great. A Jupiter-Mars conjunction is about, having that go-getter attitude. It is about setting your kind of setting an intention and really moving towards it, having a lot of optimism in the action that you're taking, believing in yourself is an incredibly empowering energy. But here's the thing. Gemini is ruled by Mercury. Mercury is currently in the sign of Virgo. And Mercury is getting ready to move retrograde from August 5th to the 28th. So what does this mean? Okay, so whenever we have a Mars-Jupiter connection, Mars wants to take action, Mars wants to go right now, move forward based on the information that it has now. I have all of the data that I need. I've collected all of the things. I know the things. I just want to forge ahead. And Jupiter there only expands what it touches, right? So we can have this feeling of like, I either want to get this started already. I want this to be over already. Why isn't this over? So there can be a sense of impatience, some irritability with things not moving as quickly as we may have hoped they would, or certain situations in our lives not having to come to a turning point or to the end that we would have hoped they would. And so that can create a certain frustration because with Mercury, not only with Mercury going retrograde for most of the month of August, which by the way, not a scary thing, okay? Let's ease off the fear of Mercury retrograde. I'll go into that in a second. And let's really integrate a Mercury retrograde for what it's meant to be. Moments of introspection, okay? If a Mars-Jupiter conjunction is about a lot of motivation, a lot of sense, a significant sense of empowerment to move forward in a certain way, but it's in Gemini, and the ruler of Gemini is about to go retrograde. This is about how do I find a sense of empowerment within, okay? Because one of the things with just the raw expression of Mars energy, especially in an air sign like Gemini, which doesn't have much grounding, is that there can be this tendency for there not to be any forethought, for there not to really be much thorough planning or thinking as to why we want to move in the direction that we want to move in. And so Mercury going retrograde, on the one hand, can make this Mars-Jupiter conjunction actually feel quite restless. But that restlessness can only take over depending on how you're moving with this energy, how you're processing this energy. And again, it's very much about wishing that things would be different than they are, or wishing that they would move quickly, a lot more quickly than they are moving, or wishing that something was done, wishing that you had an answer that you've been waiting for, or perhaps internal clarity that you think to yourself, as soon as I'm clear about this, I'm gonna take action. But this is an invitation to really ask yourself, okay, why do I want to move in that direction? Why does it make me so uncomfortable to be in this space where things are seemingly moving slower than I wish they would? If things don't move quicker, if things aren't manifesting at the pace that I wish they would, then what am I supposed to learn here? And instead of chasing the answer or chasing the understanding, it is about how do I bring myself back to myself? How do I come back to stillness in order to understand? Because here's another thing. Another thing that Jupiter is doing is that it's creating a square to Saturn in Pisces. And that square is only going to get tighter through the month of August, right? So Saturn square Jupiter is that similar energy, that energy of I have this really big vision. I have a ton of optimism. I have a ton of motivation. And then that square to Saturn, that 90-degree angle, that can really slow things down, which can feel like I'm ready to move forward, but something outside of me feels like an impediment. That Saturn square Jupiter is there for a few reasons. One, if you're building something, if you're creating something, whether it's a creative project or, you're rebuilding a relationship or you're starting over in some way, this is an opportunity for Jupiter and Gemini to gain more information, to have a better understanding of your situation, and being willing to do these things slowly and steadily. Now, don't get me wrong. A Saturn square Jupiter can be quite frustrating. And I'll say that right now, it can be quite frustrating. I personally have a Jupiter square Saturn natally, and it is by far, along with other aspects in my chart, one of the aspects that has caused me the most frustration. And it's not because of the aspect, it's because I continue to want to rush certain things in my life that are not meant to be rushed. In this case, when we look at the planets from a hierarchical place, Saturn is always going to win. The seeming limitations of Saturn are always going to win. The slowness of Saturn is always going to win, right? But why? Why is that there? Because we are meant to really do things from a place of intention. We're really meant to ask ourselves, why do I want to do what I want to do, before just going full blown into this in a very Jupiterian way. We have to keep in mind that Jupiter, when unconfined, right, by any limitations or any boundaries, it expands, and it expands quickly. But it can also be too much of something, too much of anything, an overindulgence, an overdoing of something. So when we look at a square, which can be uncomfortable and sometimes frustrating, we have to appreciate the pace of Saturn, because we're not going to outsmart it, to go around it. We have to move at the pace that this energy is asking us to move at. And so when we think about the month of August, and this being the new moon that rules August, not only are we preparing to slow the energy all the way down with this square that's only getting tighter between Saturn and Jupiter, but we're also getting ready for a Mercury retrograde pretty much the entire month. Now, what does this mean? To have a Mercury retrograde start a day after such a beautiful new moon, means that in the way that we want to shine, the things that we want to create, however we want to express ourselves, how we want to show love, how we want to receive love, how we want to be appreciated, all of these really big lessons need to integrate. And remember, these big lessons are coming from that full moon in Capricorn, right? Those need to integrate. And Leo rules the sun. Therefore, Leo rules our sun sign, regardless of what sign you are, right? It really rules your sun sign. What does the sun sign signify in astrology? It's how this identity, how your identity, how you go about the world, how it shows up in the world. That is so important, because this goes from you simply fulfilling a role for other people, simply showing up in a way where you're expected to show up in a certain way, to actually being a much more authentic expression of yourself. And an authentic expression of yourself is a soulful expression. So this is an invitation to begin to align the ego, the sun, to the soul's expression, the moon. And that kind of integrity with the self, that kind of honesty with the self, that kind of authenticity with the self requires time, requires introspection, and it requires that the energy is slow enough to where we are not so distracted by a lot of things. Because when the energy slows down in the cosmos, one of the things I've noticed is that it can get boring. It can feel so slow, right? And it's not that time is moving any slowly. It's just the energy just slows down, right? It's a feeling. At least that's the way that I've experienced the summers, because the summers, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, tend to be a time of the year every single year in which sometimes all the planets are retrograde. And so I really feel it in different aspects of my life, but it has been in the slowing down of other aspects of my life that would normally take my time, my energy, my attention, in which I have the most introspection, so that later on in the year, when all of these planets begin waking up, I have a different approach to it. And that's the point for this right now. So this is a beautiful new moon in Leo that is saying, what is the most authentic expression of your heart, of your soul? And how does that come through this vessel that is your identity? Well, that takes time. That's not an easy question. And so much of how relationships have changed this entire year, but especially with that full moon in Capricorn, that's more information that you need to integrate. Right? So then that changes the way in which we experience the Jupiter-Mars conjunction. And I think that's so important to understand, because again, it can create a level of restlessness where we might feel like, why don't I feel more motivated? Why can't I do the things that I want to do already? And if you happen to lean on, self-judgment, that can feel very, very critical, especially with a Mercury in Virgo, which in its lowest expression is extremely critical of the self. And Jupiter, the teacher of the zodiac, is the invitation, Jupiter in Gemini, right? Jupiter, the teacher of the zodiac, going within, finding the philosopher and the teacher within, Gemini, gaining information of the self within. And what does it have to tell you, right? And as that Jupiter Saturn square gets tighter and tighter through the month of August, can we hold and appreciate this sense of stillness, or a sense of like we're just kind of walking through liminal space here? Because it can feel that way. It can feel like I'm just kind of doing the same thing day in and day out. Not anything else is happening. Not anything else seems that exciting. That may be true in your external 3D reality, but again, those moments are precious. Those are precious periods of time that allow for mindfulness and presence to go within and see what's happening within. And when we're talking about a connection to Saturn, Saturn is always going to show us, perhaps what we need to recommit ourselves to, how we can shift something in fundamental or foundational in something that we're building, something in our lives, something in our work and creative projects. But more than anything, a Saturn retrograde is about coming back to the self and really asking ourselves, how do I feel? How grounded do I feel within me? Are there any perceived limitations that I have of myself? This is especially true because, again, Saturn is squaring Jupiter in Gemini, right? The sign of the mind. Be mindful of your limiting thoughts. The month of August is such a great month to pay attention to what those are. I am too old. I am too young. I don't have enough experience. These silly limitations that are not really ours. They're limitations that are learned from our external reality, Gemini, from the information that we receive from our world. And how do those hinder you from actually shining your light in the most authentic way, Leo? It's really interesting to me because the word authenticity is thrown out a lot. And I can appreciate why. I think we're all looking not just for authenticity in others, but I think what we're actually really looking for is the permission to be our most authentic self. And I don't care how much we desire to be our most authentic self, unless we're actually being it, we can be looking for the permission to be. We're still looking for a sense of approval. Is it okay for me to be me? And this isn't coming from a place of judgment. This is simply coming from a place where the understanding of what authenticity actually means, and to integrate it in that way into our bodies, into our nervous system, into our mindset, that is a whole process in itself, and it gives the word a completely different meaning. Venus's role in all of this. So at the time of the new moon, Venus is at 29 degrees Leo. 29 degrees of the zodiac in any sign is a very important energy because it is an accumulation of energy that is processing everything that that planet has been through, experienced, processed through its trajectory in that sign. And it's at that sweet spot. It's at that spot of being reborn, if you will, into another sign. So there is a great degree of accumulation of energy at the 29th degree of any sign. And that's where Venus is now. When we have the expression of any sign at the 29th degree, it can be the expression at its fullest. And depending on the integration that the person has of that energy, that's going to show us either a higher expression of that energy or a lower expression of that energy. And here's why that's important to understand. Because Venus at the 29th degree of Leo in its lowest expression can be, again, very egotistical, very arrogant, very demanding, very coming from the space where I want what I want and I want it now, right? And so why does this matter? Because Venus really for a huge part of this year has been a key player in so much of the astrology of this year. In April, it came to a conjunction to the North Node in Chiron in the middle of eclipse season, an eclipse season that had to do with relationships because we had a lunar eclipse in Libra in March. We had a solar eclipse in Aries in April. And Venus being a part of that really showed us what was going on in our relationships. This is why I'm inviting you all to sign up for the eclipse guide of September and October. Get on the waiting list below. Then in May, we had the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Taurus. And while Venus didn't play a direct role in that, it's in the sign of Taurus. It affects all of the Venusian themes. And Venus was in Taurus at the time, but the conjunction was between Uranus and Jupiter, right? So this was about the reconsideration of our value system and how our value system, how that was directly correlated to us and how that reflected itself out into our external reality. So anything that manifested from that conjunction was showing us this is our relationship to what we value or to our values. Then in June, we had the Venus-Sun conjunction in the sign of Gemini, where Venus became a star of the night, right? Then in July, we had that Venus-Pluto opposition, Venus in Leo, in opposition to Pluto retrograde in Aquarius, right? Showing us potentially an imbalance in our relationships, certain power struggles, manipulative tactics, perhaps finding things out in our relationships that we didn't find out about before, or really coming to the acceptance of this is a weight in our relationship that I've been carrying that I want to voice, that I want to express, right? And so here we have, at the time of the new moon, Venus creating a square to Uranus in Taurus. Now, a few days before the new moon in Leo, Venus in Taurus created an exact square to that Uranus in Taurus. And when we have the square of a personal planet like Venus to Uranus, this is a breakthrough. This is an understanding. This is an aha moment. And Uranus has been quite active, again, around the same timeline. So aha moment, clarity after clarity, overcoming certain thought patterns, really deciding this is what I want, this is what I no longer want, and in true Taurus fashion, really being a stickler with that, almost to, almost being like stubbornly holding on to something that we want to experience or not. So here is Venus having moved through all of that. And as she gets ready to square, or as Venus squares that Uranus and Taurus, Venus is becoming visible in the sky. And Venus is becoming visible in the sky late July and through the month of August. It's somewhat of a slower process. Okay, so at the time of the new moon, Venus is at that 29th degree of Leo, and Venus in Leo is these are the types of relationships that I want to have. I want to be able to shine my light in places where that's going to be appreciated. I want to be in relationships that are going to celebrate me in the way that I celebrate others. And if I notice something different or something other than that, then I don't want it, right? Because that fixed energy of Leo can be very all or nothing. This is what I want. This is what I don't want. And that square to Uranus and Taurus can actually bring an abrupt change or endings in certain relationships. So if you recall everything that I've been talking about thus far in the video about how we want to be in relationships and the time that it's going to take for us to really integrate the authenticity of ourselves and how our relationships reflect that back to us, all of these things, Venus plays a massive role, not just to the relationship to others, but the relationship that we have with ourselves and the relationship that we have with our life, the relationship that we have with everything in our life. At the time of the new moon, Venus is creating an in conjunction to Neptune in Pisces, and an in conjunction to Pluto retrograde in Aquarius. And here's why, because Pluto's getting ready to move into that 29th degree of Capricorn, creating an in conjunction. So what does that give us? It gives us a yod, right? It's also known as a finger of God. Now, what does a yod represent in the zodiac? A yod is a placement of discomfort, is a placement of not knowing which direction to head in and kind of just floundering about, okay? So here's the thing. Venus and Leo at an in conjunction to Neptune in Pisces, on the one hand, can mean I'm going to pretend that everything's okay. Nothing, I'm having the best time of my life. Nothing is going wrong. Everything is going right. And I hope that that's the case, because if it is, then the in conjunction between Neptune and Venus is actually one of a lot of joy. One that may not be necessarily expressed outwardly, but there's a different feeling within, right? There's a different essence of I'm getting used to this new me showing up in the world, in my relationships in this way. And that makes me really happy. It makes me a little bit uncomfortable because I'm not used to it, but it's still something that brings me a lot of joy. On the other hand, it can absolutely be putting on those rose-colored glasses and pretending that what you're being shown is not there. And really, either getting lost in that or feeling lost in terms of what direction to move in next with your relationships, okay? Now, the in conjunction of Venus in Leo to Pluto, getting ready to go back into Capricorn, is I don't really know what I feel committed to. I don't really know what I'm passionate about, or if I'm passionate or as invested in this relationship, in this project, in this job, in this place anymore. Because whenever we have different aspects between Venus and Pluto, there can be a sense of like obsession, right? I am I am more than just all in, right? I am melded into this. The in conjunction brings to question to how obsessed we are with something. And, obsession in its actual technical term is not necessarily a healthy expression of something. But when we feel passionate about something, when we feel passionate about a creative project, when we feel passionate about really making something work, that's different, because we are directing that energy towards that thing that we want to be in relationship, we want to see grow. So this yod between Neptune, Pluto, and Venus in Leo is really interesting, because here we have Venus coming out of an exact square to Uranus, which is an aha moment, a change, perhaps a drastic change in relationships, perhaps something unexpected happening in significant relationships, especially in a relationship that you've been working through things with since April. And now that that moment of clarity has come, now that that sense of perhaps an unexpected event has taken place, or you've discovered something that you didn't know before, now you kind of don't know how to move forward with this. Now you kind of don't know, well, this is what I've realized, and I don't know how to move forward with it. Hence, the slowing down of all of the energy that I've talked about thus far. Even more appropriate and necessary even for us to have that Mercury retrograde through most of the month of August, and that square, that Jupiter-Saturn square, again, tightly aspected through the month of August. This new moon has a lot of promise. And it's inviting us to, again, step into our most authentic self and expression. But we are just learning what that is now. This is an energy that's not going to allow us to be in relationships where we are like in dysfunctional agreement in order to avoid the discomfort of honest expression, of honest exchange. If you remain in the same relationships, then a different level of honesty is required. Remember, I mentioned earlier on, we're really being asked here to be much more honest. We're really being asked here to really look at what our relationships are showing us and how we're taking responsibility for remaining in some of them if that's what we choose to do. So while this new moon, again, has a lot of promise, it doesn't mean that we can't manifest anything from it. It's just that I really anticipate it actually taking 6 months for us to process, right? From the new moon to the full moon, to February of 2025. And it feeling somewhat uncomfortable. But at the end, we will have really appreciated honoring us showing up in the most honest and authentic way that we know how. Because as much as this can be about relating to others, this is about the relationship with ourselves. This is about the relationship with our integrity and to what feels honest to us. And of course, this is going to take us into eclipse season, in which the South Node in Libra, therefore Venus, is going to play a really big role. Oh, so the mindfulness question of the week is, how am I being asked to show up as my most authentic self, and how does that feel? How am I being asked to show up as my most authentic self, and how does that feel? So if you want to use that prompt as something that helps you set the intentions for this new moon, I really invite you to do so. Use this prompt as setting the intention for the week, so that things in your life show you the answer to this question, so that you take moments of introspection to actually understand what that means to you. Because to simply go and set intentions with a new moon without fully taking an honest look within and noticing, the circumstances around you, it's pointless, it's fruitless. So much love to you all. Thank you all again so much. Let me know in the comments how all of this lands for you, what's been coming up for you. Don't forget to sign up for that eclipse guide on the wait list, and I will talk to you next week.